Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another podcast episode for my podcast. So, as you guys may know, if you are subscribed to my YouTube channel, I took a week for a break, and now I'm kind of toying with the idea of uploading one podcast every 2 weeks just while I get settled into the new routine of having a day job as well as doing my podcast, because I know otherwise I'll get burnt out. But I'm still kind of toying with that idea, so you guys let me know how you feel about that. Also, I always forget to introduce myself, but my name is Lily. I'm your host. This is Lily's Little Life Corner, and today we will be asking the question, why is everyone speaking in code? What's going on? Now, I do have a few disclaimers and a content warning that I need to give out, as well as just kind of where I stand in a certain position. You'll see. So in today's episode, I will be talking about and mentioning rape, genocide, child exploitation, child sexual exploitation material, or CSAM, and I'm not going to go in depth into any of the topics. I am just going to mention them, so if that is a bit of a trigger for you, this podcast episode is not for you. But I also want to make it clear that I am a pro-Palestine person, that it has always been my stance and will always be my stance. And so if you are someone who is pro-Israel, this podcast episode is not for you, and I do not want your negative energy. So, feel free to unsubscribe from my podcast episode. Feel free to unsubscribe from my YouTube channel if in fact you are pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian genocide, you know what I mean? But again, I will be just mentioning those topics. I won't be going in depth about the history of Palestine. I won't be talking about in-depth things about rape or anything like that. It'll just be mentions. So anyway, let's get started. Also, my usual disclaimer also applies for this. I am not a psychologist. I'm just a psychology enthusiast. But this podcast episode will not be touching so much on psychology so much. It'll be touching more on just the effects of language changing, more linguistics than psychology, if I'm being honest. But again, I'm also not a linguistic expert, so anything I say, you have to take it with a grain of salt, okay? But anyway, let's get started. So with the rise of TikTok, and also with the rise of this potential banning that TikTok might have, people have found themselves needing to use a different kind of language in order to spread the message that they want to spread. So whether that be a story time about the time that they were caught having sex, or whether that be that they were trying to spread awareness for something serious, whatever the case may be, they found themselves needing to overly censor themselves in order to fit TikTok criteria for what is allowed on their platform. And this again was further emphasized with the talks of TikTok being banned in the United States. But how is people censoring themselves on TikTok affecting our day-to-day speech and how we communicate with other people? That is kind of what we will be talking about in this podcast episode. You guys may have seen these kinds of TikToks swirling around where people are almost speaking in code. They'll switch out words for similar sounding words, or they'll whisper a word or mouth the word that they're trying to use. If you're watching a YouTube video, because of course this is not just limited to TikTok, this is also widespread on Pinterest, YouTube, Instagram, pretty much anywhere where you can post content. But if you're watching a YouTube video, for example, they'll do a duck sound whenever they swear, or they'll mute the audio, or they'll do a bleep overlay. Or sometimes when you're watching this kind of content, they'll abbreviate what the word actually is. So they'll use SA instead of sexual assault, or they'll say indecently assaulted. One of the most offensive ones, in my own personal and humble and honest opinion, is when people say Paliwali instead of Palestinian. But case in point, there's a whole lot of censorship to be happening online, and I think it's getting to the point where it's a little bit ridiculous, okay? And listen, I'm all for censorship when it's appropriate, such as, and I'm going to have to censor myself for these first few minutes, but I agree with censorship when it comes to things like CP, or like I mentioned in the beginning, child sexual exploitation material, or what's more commonly known as child sexual assault material, or CSAM. And you kind of understand what I mean by CP, child P. But what's not appropriate to me is when big advertisers keep pushing social media websites to censor more and more. The limit has gone a little bit too far, in my opinion. It's to the point that the way that we censor ourselves online is the way that we're censoring ourselves in person, like face-to-face meeting in public, where no one is going to take us down for speaking a certain way. No advertising corporations are watching. TikTok is not watching you. YouTube isn't watching you. You're just speaking with your friends, whether that be over messages, whether that be over FaceTime, whether that be in person and face to face, and we still feel the need to censor ourselves the same way that we do online and when we're posting content online. Let me give you a few examples from my own kind of personal experiences, which I'm sorry, but I have to expose my friends, and I will be throwing a little bit of shade, just a little bit, in a friendly way towards my friends. But my friends are kind of very notorious for this kind of censoring in the friend group chat. It's a place where TikTok is not gonna flag our messages and take the messages down. It's not like YouTube is gonna come and say you're demonetized, you know what I mean? But if we're talking about sex, they'll spell it SEGGS. If we're talking about masturbation, for example, they'll say DJing instead of masturbating. If we're talking about suicide, there's been times where we'll say sewer slide. And again, this is our friend group chat. Nobody but us is reading the group chat. You know what I mean? Well, maybe except for the NSA. But advertising corporations are not running ads on our friend group chat. Therefore, we don't need to adhere to advertiser-friendly talk, but we still do advertiser-friendly talk. There are no consequences for us using the words as they were intended to be used and without any censors, but we still feel the need to censor ourselves. We still feel this sort of need is the only way that I can explain it, to censor ourselves. Another example is when I was meeting my friend CK Jensen to talk about kind of our writing projects. We're both authors, we both write very often, so sometimes we will meet up for coffee and we will talk about what our projects are dealing with. And I found myself censoring myself when I was talking about a project idea that I had in mind, and CK had to come and be like, you realize you're censoring yourself, right? And I had to think about it, and then that's when we started talking about the topic of censoring ourselves to an extreme degree and how TikTok has kind of influenced that kind of language and almost encouraged that kind of language. They have some strong opinions about it that they shared with me, and so I would like to bring them on and let them kind of tell you about it. So we're going to move over to that segment right now, where I kind of interview them and they tell you about their thoughts and kind of some of their experiences with self-censorship and stuff like that. Please do introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Rin, or CK Jensen is my main online persona. I have been on social media for the last 11 years or so. I was very obedient as a child, and I didn't get on social media before I was 13, like all the terms and conditions say. Even so, I've been online for a really long time, but it's only been in the last couple of years I've been kind of noticing the self-censorship coming on, so I'm really excited to be coming on to Lily's podcast to talk about it.
Okay, so my first question, how did you first realize people were censoring themselves maybe just a little bit too much?
I think it was when it first led from TikTok to Instagram, because I didn't get TikTok until pretty late in the game, in the terms of people having social medias like TikTok. But when it came to Instagram and Instagram Reels, and I couldn't figure out what people meant by their, it took me a second to figure out what the censored term meant in real life, because sometimes they're just a little bit silly, honestly. The censorship terms don't make a lot of sense, and they're for rape, when people use terms like grape for rape, it's that doesn't make any sense, but they sound similar, so if you're just reading it, you might not pick up on it. SA, I think, is an interesting censorship, and that's one that we talked about in the lead up to that episode, because it's maybe not always censorship, but it is an abbreviation, and I think that can be a different can of worms, and I'm still trying to figure out how I feel about abbreviations versus straight up censorship.
Well, and speaking of the grape versus rape, people have even started censoring themselves to the point where they won't even spell out GRAPE. They will just use the grape emoji and then do ING if they're talking about raping, or they'll just do the grape emoji if they're saying rape.
It's censoring plus hieroglyphics.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why?
My question is, what are your opinions on censorship from social media?
Social media should not be censoring people. Like, the great thing about social media, or the way I think it's supposed to be designed, is that you should be able to follow who you want, and if people you don't like, or if people you follow are talking about topics you don't like, you can unfollow them. Like, you can curate a feed like that, and you get an echo chamber, and that leads to a whole other set of problems, or maybe you're not informed. But sticking with like the censorship thing right now, like you should be able to curate your feed, but then you go into like the explore page, and if it's not curated enough, like when I first started TikTok, I was seeing so many weird TikToks on my For You page because the algorithm hadn't figured out what I like yet, and that is often like books and writing and authors and stuff like that is a lot of my For You page, and occasionally a fun TikTok dance will come across it. But social media shouldn't be censoring the people. People can choose to censor themselves, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But generally, I think that it's not helpful to us as a society for us to use words that are euphemisms or censors or just dancing around the actual terms, because these are like really heavy topics and they should be talked about and they should be given like respect is maybe not the right word, but gravity is
Yeah.
probably a better word. Yeah, I think we need to give heavy topics the gravity they deserve and like not make jokes about them.
Yeah. I was talking about this, but for example, like a lot of people will censor the phrase child pornography. They will do an acronym, CP. But I was talking about this because I play Call of Duty. A lot of people refer to Call of Duty points or like in-game currency for Call of Duty. They will refer to them as CP as well. So if you were really trying to raise awareness to this very, very serious issue, which is child pornography, and you use the term CP, some people might not have any idea what it is you're talking about. Like, are you talking about
Yeah.
in-game currency or are you talking about a very real issue?
Absolutely, and that's like what I was going with is like the first thing is like sometimes people just don't know the acronyms we're using to like censor ourselves. And so I understand if you were to use an acronym or like a shortened form or something in like an academic paper or something where you have like previously defined the term, that's okay. But in a standalone video like on TikTok or Instagram where that might be the only video of yours someone ever sees, you can't be using terms that people don't know what they mean without defining them somewhere, like in the caption or in the video or the post or whatever. Yeah, it doesn't work, and you're right that especially when we use acronyms, then we're not necessarily getting at the right ideas, and people have preconceived notions that come with these acronyms. Because at this point, like short two-letter acronyms, they've been done for everything.
Yeah, like AF for as fuck is
Yeah,
one that I use a
exactly.
lot. So let's move on to the next question. What are your opinions on self-censorship, kind of just in general?
And I think self-censorship is good. And let me like finish my sentence. In the sense of like just not saying something is can be good. Like maybe we shouldn't be talking about sexually sensitive topics in front of minors all the way, like in a graphic way all the time. Like that's not helpful. That's not good. And that's not to say minors shouldn't be exposed to these topics because we live in a world where they're going to be exposed to those topics. But we can't be like we can't self-censor in a way that makes it harder to talk about those topics. So like sexual assault, a lot of people are going to be sexually assaulted by the time they're 18. Like people suck. And if we don't give them a vocabulary to talk about that without like the jokes and the censorship of like TikTok, then they're not going to understand how to talk about that, and it's going to be more trauma on top that they have to undo. But going back to my original point, like if you like this happened in a Discord we were in recently. You were talking about like ideas for this episode, and you're like, can anyone like refer me to videos that refer to these things? And you put in like a spoiler box on Discord, and you said minors don't read this because it would have like triggering topics. I think that's like a good way to self-censor, like censor yourself selectively, and it depends on your audience and it depends on what the topic is, but I think it can be okay. But overall, self-censorship when it is to avoid regular censorship by like corporations or the government or whatever, that's dumb. Like, dumb is maybe not the right word for that, but it's inane to think that we should censor ourselves because we don't want to be like we silence ourselves so we are not silent.
Yeah. That's kind of also what I said, like, especially during my last few points where I was like, how far is too far? Like, at what point are we doing the work of TikTok versus like TikTok actually stepping in and censoring us?
Yeah.
So why do you think people are censoring themselves outside of social media? Why do you think that kind of language has transitioned outside of TikTok and into day-to-day lives?
I would say it's habit, but it also totally depends on the crowds you run in. Because when we first talked about this before you like started your podcast, because this is one of your first ideas you wanted to do on your podcast, right?
Yeah.
You were talking about how your friends will like self-censor in conversations, and none of my friends self-censor in conversations. And I don't know, and we're like pretty similar in age. I don't know if our friends are different ages. But like my friends don't really do that, but I think people do it out of habit. If they are talking about these topics on social media, then they're probably censoring themselves out of habit.
Mm.
You know?
Yeah.
Like my friends, none of my friends are super active on social media. I'm like the most active person on social media, but I don't talk about any of these sensitive topics on social media. Like I talk about my writing and fun fantasy things and the fun spreadsheets I make for my writing. So I think people are doing it out of habit mostly. Just because I think the way you talk and the media you consume, like everything that like floods your brain, the more it's like flooded in your brain, it's going to do it. But if you have a algorithm that's not feeding you all these things, so you're not seeing it all the time and you're not posting about it all the time, then obviously you're not going to develop that habit of speaking in self-censorship in all these terms.
Yeah. I tried to ask my friends, like, why do you guys censor yourselves, especially after we talked about this? And they didn't really say much. They just made kind of jokes about it. And then I was like, that's kind of interesting. Like, it's almost like they were further censoring themselves. Like, maybe they didn't want to be embarrassed or something. I don't really know. I'm going to have to ask them again, like, why do you guys censor yourselves? I know for me, it is kind of out of habit as well, but it is also a little bit of feeling of shame. Like if somebody's watching behind my back, I'm a very paranoid person, so I'm always like, somebody behind me, you know? But I think that's why I'm always cautious whenever I'm typing out texts to my friends. Like we're the only ones that are going to read those texts, but it still feels a little bit shameful to openly talk about these kinds of topics. And
yes. So shame is a really interesting thing because there's shame versus there's guilt, right? And I'm drawing this from the works of Brene Brown, who's like one of my favorite humans, like very good sociologist, psychologist. I don't remember her exact term, but she's a researcher who studies shame and vulnerability and human connection. And she talks about how shame is negatively motivated and guilt is positively motivated. Guilt like drives you to be a better person, but shame drives you to act in secret. And I think you're right that there is a culture of shame around topics like sex and sexual assault and, you know, all these other things people are censoring on social media. I have a hard time thinking of, like, them off the top of my head because, again, I'm not, like, super in that space. Like, it comes across, when it comes across my feed, I don't like the video because I don't want to see more of it. Because I'm a very anxious person. I can't deal with all the sadness in the world, and I don't need to know about every bad thing that happens because I know the bad things are happening, but I don't need them to be in my face. That's not good for my mental health. Yeah, genuinely, if I was any more surrounded by it, then I don't need to adjust myself. I don't need to justify myself. It's okay. I can't deal with it. Let's leave it at that. So, your friends laughing about the censorship, I think, does indicate that same shame. Like, they're embarrassed to be talking about it. But I think that's because we make, like, this culture of jokes about it. Like, it's all a joke and it's not serious, but then when it is serious, you can't talk about it because it is a joke, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and this goes a lot into my answer to your next question about, like, the ridiculous instances of self-censorship. I think just, like, any TikTok video in general is a ridiculous instance of self-censorship. And, like, I understand why a lot of people, like, self-censor, especially on TikTok. Like, again, they want their videos to get those views in the algorithm. And maybe those videos wouldn't get the views if they weren't self-censored. But especially the censorship around self-harm and suicidality, like, this is a topic that very much affects me. And I stopped making suicide jokes in my life a couple of years ago, and it genuinely helped my mental health so much. Because jokes around suicidality and, like, this is the same issue with, like, sexual assault, it desensitizes the issue, which is harmful to anyone who suffers from this issue. Like, when you self-censor, especially in jokes, it makes a really big issue seem like a joke itself. So, like, suicidality, sexual assault, rape, like, all these things, like, the genocide that are going on right now in the world, like, when you self-censor around these things, you're making it not seem as big of a problem. You're making it not seem super serious. You're making it harder for people to access information about it, as we were talking about earlier. And I don't know. I think it's very Big Brother, like George Orwell 1984, that people are like feeling that they have to do this way. Like, oh, someone is always watching us and we have to be really careful. But what's going to happen if you like self-censor or don't self-censor? Like, in the grand scheme of things, in the world we live in, nothing's really going to happen to you, at least in America.
Yeah.
Like, I understand that the censorship scheme is not the right word, but like scene is probably the word I think I was going for. The censorship scene in like China is very different. Like places, yeah, but in like the US, you can just kind of say whatever you want, and the worst thing is maybe not getting the like views you want, or maybe you'll get the views for being controversial. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, and I actually talked about countries as well because I was reading a Psychology Today article about that, and at the beginning it said like people in the US don't really have reason to fear, so they shouldn't have the reason to self-censor to the point that they are. But in other countries, and I thought specifically because I am Mexican and because I'm from Latin America, I thought of Venezuela, who just had elections that a lot of people believe were rigged, and a lot of people who are coming out and saying these elections were rigged are being put into re-education camps. And so that was kind of my first thought.
Yeah, like that's not happening in the US, and it really sucks. Like it's awful that's happening in Venezuela.
Yeah.
But in the US, that's not going to happen to you, at least not in this current political economy. If a certain candidate wins the race, that may be different.
Yeah.
But like, the stakes are so much lower than people would have you believe, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and like you said, the worst that could happen is you're not going to get the views on TikTok that you want to get.
Yeah. Or I guess worse than that, your account could be banned for talking about sensitive topics against the TikTok like community guidelines or whatever.
Yeah.
Which I guess is a worse off thing, but like, I don't know. I'm not that attached to social media that I'd be like upset about losing it. But also maybe just like, I don't want to say social media is not the place to talk about those things, because I think it is. But there are social medias other than like TikTok and Instagram. Like you could be using Substack, you could be using Medium. Like there are all these like places where you can write think pieces. And that's probably a better venue for this than like anything else.
Yeah. You speaking about like social media consequences, it made me remember that some people will just post one or two TikToks that will go viral, and they're not expecting fame. They're not uploading a TikTok for views, but they will get views. And so that just kind of reminds me, like some of these people that are uploading TikToks that you sometimes see on your For You page, or even Instagram Reels or YouTube videos or whatever, they're censoring themselves even though they don't want a social media presence. And that just made me think of like how many more people are uploading one or two like one shots of any kind of content they're creating, right? Whether that be YouTube videos, Instagram Reels, TikTok, whatever it may be. And they're not doing it for fame, but they're still censoring themselves. Like they're not censoring themselves because
they're censoring themselves despite whether they're going viral or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it goes back to like looping back to like habit, like they're doing it out of habit because that's what they're consuming. That's what they're talking about.
Yeah, especially if their entire For You page is censoring themselves. They kind of like, it's kind of become the norm when whether you upload a TikTok to become famous or not, you still have to kind of follow these unwritten rules on TikTok with censorship, which is very, very interesting to me. And obviously not just TikTok. I'm saying TikTok a lot because it's the platform that's most on my mind, but this kind of goes hand in hand with YouTube, Instagram, Twitter even.
Like any of these social media platforms, I think we're talking TikTok a lot because it's a very prominent one right now.
Yeah.
Especially with like talks in the US government about like shutting it down and like all that. It's a lot. TikTok is very much in the public eye, and I think it makes sense that we're talking about it. Yeah.
And so I do want to ask, like, what has been the most ridiculous instance of self-censorship that you've seen? Something that you kind of sat there and looked at and you were like, I have no idea what this person is trying to say. And then you thought about it for a while and you were like, they're censoring themselves.
I don't know if I have a specific one. Like I said, I've curated my feed to be very non-problematic. Like the most I get of like not problematic, but like where I would see like people censoring themselves
Mm-hmm.
is my Instagram stories where people are sharing things that are important to them. And I have one friend in particular. They are like my best friends since middle school. I love them. And they are always posting political things, which is fine. It's good. That's their story. That's their platform. They can do whatever they want. But for my own mental health, I end up skipping it. Not because it's censored, but because it's just too sensitive for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if I have any like specific. And I talked a little bit about like in general, I think ridiculous instances of self-censorship is all of them.
Yeah.
And then I talked about like suicidality and like desensitizing issues and like the joking around it is like not okay. But I don't think I have any specific instance where I'm like, I don't even know what they're trying to say because of censorship.
That makes sense. Yeah, I have, ever since that conversation at Beans and Brews, I have also curated my feed to where the content that I'm interacting with is still like political. It's still raising awareness to certain things, but I'm following creators that don't censor themselves and that say the words as they should be said. Their captions are as they should be. There's no emojis substituting anything. And so I really curated that kind of, and those kinds of things, those kinds of videos exist. And so it only makes me question more, why are these creators kind of almost going overboard with their censorship?
That's the point. And I didn't know those creators existed because, again, I just don't see much political content on my feed. Like, social media is my space for my writing buddies. They just little people on my phone who also like to write little fantasy stories. So yeah, I didn't even know that, but I think it makes a lot of sense that there are people out there, and because like I will say I follow a lot of like sex positivity and like sex education accounts on like Instagram, which I use more than I use TikTok. But even they will like self-censor, and that's more, I think it's less because they're like not talking about the thing. It's not that they're not talking about the thing. It's more that Instagram will literally take their accounts down if they do not. If they say the word sex too many times, they'll be taken down. Which like sucks, but it's because of the community guideline against like, you can't solicit sex on Instagram, and you can't, there's one other thing regarding sex on Instagram, and I don't remember exactly what it is off the top of my head. But like, Instagram's algorithm cannot differentiate between like sex solicitation, so like sex work, and sex education.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like another instance in which I think so like self-censorship can be good, because I learn a ton. Like I think of like Vanessa and Xander, who's a sex therapist, and her husband Xander, who's just a regular guy. Like they do awesome sex education content, and they're like that's great. And then I can't remember the name of the other couple. They like queer sex therapy is another really good one, and like they will censor their posts. But I think that self-censorship, not self-censor, but to actually like still get it out there. So that's like another thing we haven't really talked about, is like what is the goal of the self-censorship? Like, are you doing it for views? And why do you want those views? And are you doing it to educate, or are you doing it because you want to go viral and get a bunch of followers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that is a question that I also touched on. Like, what is the kind of end goal of this? And there's also, I think there is a line to be drawn. For example, like how I was saying, this creator that refers to Palestinians as Paliwali people. I think that is me personally, I think that is super duper offensive, especially when I see other creators on the same platform saying Palestinians without any issue. But, and so that's when my question becomes, okay, but why are you censoring yourself to this degree? I understand you are getting important information out, but at the same time, you're being offensive towards the group that you're trying to raise awareness for. So what is...
not being sensitive to racial issues.
Yeah.
Because you're right, that calling Palestinians, I think you said Paliwali people, like that feels like a slur. I don't think you should say that.
Yeah.
Like, don't do that, please. So like, yes, you have to be like sensitive to the topic, of course. And I think it comes down to just being really well informed, because obviously using sex, like SEGGS, instead of sex, to talk about like sexual assault versus like actual sex education, like those are very different spheres. So you have to like really consider what sphere you're going for, and like, are you trauma dumping on the internet, or are you informing people so they can have like healthier sex lives?
So my final question is, have there been any instances where you have censored yourself to a point that wasn't necessary because you weren't going to face consequences. So it wasn't like you were posting something on social media and you censored yourself. It was just maybe you were talking to a friend and you censored yourself. Have there been any instances like that?
I don't think I personally have instances like that. Like, I like to think I don't have TikTok brain rot. Like, I don't talk in TikTok speak like a lot of people do. Like, occasionally a word will come through, like, of course I say slay, I'm gay. Like, I don't know what else to say. Like, I use slang, but I don't use like the censorship slang, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't have that. I think I've actually never even said the word brain rot aloud before today, just now, because it doesn't cross my mind to censor myself. Like, if I'm going to like censor myself, it's going to be like what I talked about with question like 3, like my opinions on self-censorship in general, where I'm like selectively choosing to talk about things according to my audience.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm not going to go to a class of 3rd graders and talk to them about, like, sex education and sexual assault. I may be talking to them about sexual education because I think sex education should start really soon, and that's, like, a personal opinion. I'm saying controversial things on your podcast. Sex education should just be a fact of life. It should be healthy, and it should be good, and it should be normalized. But, like, sexual assault, don't normalize that. And, like, just be selective in who you, like, talk to your audience about, you know? Like, it does, yeah. I think... To wrap up my thoughts, censorship is a bad thing. Pretty obvious. Self-censorship can be more complicated, but you have to like think about why you're doing it and who your audience is. And curate your TikTok feed to be better, I guess. I don't know what else to tell you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. This was fun.
Thank you
Like,
for
very
being
heavy
here.
topic, but it was fun to chat with you. We should do this more.
Yes. Thank you so much. So obviously there can be good reason to censor yourself. People with impulsive or intrusive thoughts often have to censor themselves and their actions because if they were to act on their thoughts, they'd face the consequences. And that's something that the First Amendment also states, is that if you were to shout something, you wouldn't necessarily be free from consequences. You can say whatever you want. But say, for example, if you were in the middle of a busy mall and you shouted, "I'm going to start shooting up the place," police would be called on you and you would face charges for inciting something at the very least. So you can't just say whatever and then face no consequences. So obviously the act of censoring yourself is very necessary. In some countries, you really do have to censor yourself because freedom of speech is not a thing in some countries. You will be prosecuted for saying things that are against the government. However, in the US, like this Psychology Today article that I will have linked in the show notes and in the YouTube video of this podcast episode points out, is that people in the US have this inherent fear that they will express an unpopular viewpoint. So for example, politics are an area where a lot of people find themselves self-censoring in order to prevent fights. If you've ever heard of Thanksgiving horror stories and how people censor themselves because their uncle won't censor themselves, you know, their racist or homophobic or otherwise bigoted uncle is not censoring himself, but to be the bigger person, you do have to censor yourself and you do have to kind of stay quiet lest you want family arguments to begin. The Psychology Today article also goes on to say self-censorship may be a survival strategy of sorts in a culture that a new book calls toxically polarized, in which different camps see themselves as aggressively divided on an increasingly broad range of issues. And they go on to list COVID-19 as one of those increasingly broad range of issues. So there's definitely pros to censoring yourself, of course. But my biggest question is, why are people censoring themselves to such a big degree? To a degree that is almost unnecessary. You are allowed to talk about sex just normally. You can just say the word sex or type the word sex, S-E-X. You don't have to use an emoji to represent it unless you're, I guess, trying to be flirty. But even then, it's kind of like, you don't really have to. But for some reason, people are feeling compelled to censor themselves in that way. One big part of it that I've personally noticed is shame. And this is kind of a connection that Psychology Today has also made. When they ask the question who is more likely to self-censor, they quote Olivia Reams, I think is how how you pronounce it, Remes, who is an expert on anxiety disorders. And she goes on to say, people with anxiety often edit what they're about to say in their minds because they don't want to offend anyone. They try to find the perfect moment to bring out something, and they worry about the impact that they have on other people. In general, they tend to assume the worst and worry about all the things that might go wrong. Further on in the article, when they're still asking who is more likely to self-censor, they say, on the other hand, too much self-criticism and rumination on the imperfections in our words or actions, or on the possibility of losing a standing in our social group, can worsen our mental and physical health. But those are also, if you have a worse mental physical health, you're also more likely to censor yourself. But Psychology Today says that the best predictor of self-censorship was education. They say specifically those with more formal education self-censor at much higher rates. This suggests that one thing they learned in college was to avoid saying the wrong thing, which is very interesting. But the shame that I have noticed has been kind of a little bit different. And so this Psychology Today article might be just a little bit outdated just because social media is so quickly moving and so fast paced. I have noticed the shame within, like I said earlier, talks of sex. Whenever somebody brings up the topic of sex, people, in my experience, are more likely to censor themselves. For example, they'll spell the word sex in a completely different way, S-E-G-G-S. It sounds the same. If you were to read the text out loud, it would sound like you were saying sex. So to me, this is just another form of almost purity culture. It's kind of an expansion pack of purity culture, where if all of the content creators you come across are speaking in code when it comes to sexual topics, sexual encounters, it almost gives you this idea or this feeling that talking about such topics or encounters is dirty and is shameful, and you should censor yourself. And you're censoring yourself even when there is no need. If you're talking to a trusted friend about your boyfriend, for example, you shouldn't have to feel the need to use a different word or a different emoji to substitute what it is you're talking about. There is no shame within the friend group. The friend group isn't going to, shame you. Oh, how dare you spell it S-E-X? How dare you not spell it S-E-G-G-S? You know what I mean? But within ourselves, there's still that feeling of, I can't spell it. I can't spell S-E-X. I have to spell it S-E-G-G-S. And again, this would all be fine in a TikTok, for example. I struggle to really say that it would be fine because censorship to this degree is not fine, right? But if you're sharing a story and if you don't want your TikTok to get taken down, I guess it would be fine if you spell sex S-E-G-G-S. That is where that kind of censorship should live, but that kind of censorship shouldn't live in the friend group chat. I guess that's my point. But anyway, let's continue exploring these kinds of reasons. So another reason that I found that's kind of on par with shame is this idea of, well, if everyone is doing it, then I would be a loser to not do it. And this is a phenomenon that is so prevalent on social media, but more specifically on TikTok. But I'm going to come out with a video essay kind of digging into this sort of skewed community mentality, we'll put it this way. But it's just the essence of it. It's just if everyone else is talking this weird code slang, you'd be the loser if you didn't also do it. All the popular creators are talking this way. All of the smaller creators are talking this way. Why wouldn't you talk in this way? And then the final reason that I'll talk about is, of course, the linguistics part of this. It's how language naturally progresses, Language and language study is something that I feel has changed dramatically as more and more technology comes out. And not only as more and more technology comes out, but as more and more technology is made accessible to different groups of people. For example, before TV and radio were widely accessible, people had to rely on their community to kind of learn how to speak and learn what was slang, learn what wasn't slang, learn what was appropriate to say, learn what wasn't appropriate to say. And my point kind of also is that people have been censoring themselves since the dawn of time, since people could speak pretty much. But in language evolution specifically, when TV and radio were not widely accessible, like I said, people had to rely on their communities. That's how you got kind of pockets of densely intricate and unique accents and dialects that differed a lot from the other nearest pocket. One example would be if you go further into the Appalachian Mountains, you will find smaller sectors of people and smaller groups of people that they all speak very similar, but they sound so different from people in the city. It's still Appalachia, but people further into the mountains speak differently than people in the city. And that's because they're more isolated, their language kind of develops within each other. Whereas if you go to the city, you're often getting people from out of the city, people migrating into the city, people migrating out, and thus the accent is kind of more fluid, more adaptable, I guess is the word. I don't want to say non-existent because everybody has an accent, of course, but you kind of get what I'm trying to say. Again, I'm not a linguist. So when TV and radio became widely accessible, people got the chance to hear other people speak. It wasn't just their neighbors that they were hearing speaking, it was people across the country, people across the world. And of course, with that developed the Mid-Atlantic accent, where people who worked in radio or people who were actors had to use this accent to be quote unquote more understandable. There's still a debate on whether or not that was more understandable than just people speaking naturally, but you kind of get what I'm saying with the expansion of and the accessibility and the availability of hearing other people talk. Accents developed, and that only expanded with the internet and social media. And that is how we now have what is known as the internet accent. That is also how we get the influencer accent, because other influencers are seeing how influencers are speaking, and so then they mimic that to try and get views, try and get engagement, etc. That's also how we get the influencer gasp, which is kind of sad if you think about it too deeply, so let's not think about it too deeply. So like I said, your own language changes and adapts depending on what you're being exposed to. And although sure, most TikTok users can understand what you might mean when you use the grape emoji and then do -ing, most people in real life will not have any idea what you're talking about or what you're trying to say. And that is where things kind of become an issue. Words have meaning and they have impact. And so what happens when you're trying to raise awareness for a very serious situation, but you can't stop yourself from speaking in this almost different English dialect in order to get your message across? Will you get your message across as effectively if you were to just say what it is you wanted to say without censoring yourself and trying to use different words for the words that you're trying to say? Am I making sense? So like I said, people on TikTok think they have a good reason to censor themselves. They obviously want to share a story and don't want to get their video taken down or demonetized. But what happens when the person censoring themselves is trying to raise awareness for something serious? How far is too far? One of the content creators I would sometimes come across when pro-Palestinian creators were participating in the Pass the Hat challenge that originated from the Operation Olive Branch was someone who would censor herself to the point of calling Palestinians Pali-Wali people. And anyone who supported Palestinians were called Pali-Wali allies. And in almost every single TikTok she would be selling, and in every single TikTok that I saw, she would be selling something in the TikTok shop that would give proceeds to Palestinian people who were trying to escape Gaza and move into the Egypt border. And with that comes this notion of people who link the TikTok shop in their TikToks, their videos are automatically boosted in the algorithm. So I kind of find the excuse that, oh, well, I was just censoring myself so that the algorithm would spread my TikTok across different pages. I kind of find that excuse not enough. I don't know about you, but I would feel very, very uncomfortable if my heritage and my identity were stripped down to something that sounds cute. I don't want my heritage and nationality to be censored by obviously the big advertising companies, but I think there's a difference between censoring yourself versus cutesifying something that absolutely should not be cutesified or commodified in any sort of way, such as an erasure of an identity that you're only helping to erase. And like I said, this content creator, it wasn't like she was being overly censored by TikTok itself. She had the TikTok shop linked in her TikTok, every single TikTok that she would make. So her TikTok would inevitably end up on people's For You page. But she still felt the need to cutesify Palestine and Palestinian people. And that to me is where the line should be drawn. I know I wouldn't want to be referred to as Mexi Wexy because the corporations who run ads decided that the word Mexican was too dirty to be used on platforms that they were trying to advertise on. So I get that point. I get that sometimes social media will censor very unnecessarily, but one has to wonder whether these influencers are being overly cautious to the point where they accomplish the opposite of their goal. Instead of preserving the history and cultural significance of the name Palestine and Palestinians, you're contributing to the erasure of their culture by calling them Pali Wali, or saying Palestine is the Pali place. It's not like it's Chuck E. Cheese. It's a country, it's an entire group of people who have been oppressed on their own land by those who stole their land. And you're getting on TikTok saying that you disagree with Israel for erasing Palestinian culture, but you're only doing the same exact thing. So I ask again, how far is too far? Where's the line drawn between wanting to get views for raising awareness to this very serious problem versus wanting to get views for your own selfish reasons? Wanting to get views because you want your page to grow, wanting to get views because you want advertiser money. One point that kind of proves that these influencers are overly cautious is that I've seen people who will censor words that shouldn't be censored in the context that they're being used in. For example, the word kill has a lot of different meanings depending on the context in which it is being used. So for example, if you say, I killed this spider, you wouldn't be taken down unless I guess you showed some form of extreme ways of killing a spider. Then you might be taken down for animal abuse, or you might be taking it down for gore if you show yourself killing a spider on screen. But if you just say, guys, I killed a spider earlier in my room, you're not going to be taken down. And if you spell it Killed, you're not going to be taken down. But some people still feel the need to spell it out K***Lled. And this is, of course, leaked into regular people on the internet and the way that regular people on the internet interact, to the point where people are censoring themselves on sites that allow for human moderation, such as Reddit or Discord. If you post something in a subreddit that is overly moderated, yeah, of course, you might feel the need to censor yourself. But if you post on a subreddit that has very loose moderation, you will still see people censoring themselves. On Discord, it really depends on what server you go into. Some servers have very severe moderation. They will put bots in place to automatically detect something that goes against the rules, and that can lead to censorship, just in general, not self-censorship, but censorship in general. Whereas other Discord servers don't have that extreme amount of moderation, and you can pretty much say whatever it is that you want. And even in those Discord servers, you still see people putting asterisk in place of a different word that shouldn't be censored, or using an emoji instead of typing out the actual word that they want to use. But back to the point of words losing their meaning. If you spend a majority of your in real life time where you're interacting with people in real life and not just through a screen, if you spend the majority of that time talking about child porn as CP and you actively censor yourself when talking about a very real issue such as child pornography, who do you think you're helping? The abbreviation or the acronym of CP could also be referring to COD points, Call of Duty points, that you can buy on the Call of Duty website that'll get you skins. So if you decided to go into social work and you grew up on this kind of language, this kind of censorship, and this kind of self-censorship, and you went into this social work where things like these are very, very serious, and you felt really uncomfortable with saying the words that you need to say, who do you think that's going to help? I don't know if I'm making my point, but I hope I am, and I hope you guys understand kind of what I'm trying to say. If you're genuinely trying to raise awareness to something that is a very real problem, you shouldn't need to feel uncomfortable when using the words that you need to use. You shouldn't have to refer to sexual assault as SA. You shouldn't have to refer to workplace harassment as WH or something silly. You should say the words that you're trying to say. But let me close this podcast episode off with more ways that we can stop this sort of ridiculous self-censoring. And those ways are using the actual words that you need to use. Don't spell sex, S-E-G-G-S, spell it the way you normally would. Even on social media platforms, try not to censor yourself as much. Try to say as many things as you can without getting demonetized or without your video getting taken down. If we censor ourselves, we're only allowing for these advertising companies to push and push our limits even more. We're doing the work for them. There is no need to censor yourself to such an insane degree. Another way to circumvent this is to speak the words and then just edit your captions later on. So this works really, really well on TikTok, but sometimes people still take it overboard. For example, the word killed will be spelled K1LL3D, which brings to topic another issue. And that is people with disabilities often have no idea what it is you're saying. If you're typing up a Reddit post and you're censoring yourself and you spell killed, K*LLED, the screen readers, which people who can't see or have very limited eyesight use in order to navigate the internet, will read your post as K** lead. That makes no sense. And screen readers have not gotten better. They have not adapted to this quickly changing way that we're speaking. And so that's why it's crucial for you guys to censor yourselves in the least amounts possible. Talk about things that you can absolutely get away with and talk about them in clear and concise ways without beating around the bush and making words lose their meaning, or without making people with disabilities have a harder time understanding what it is you're trying to say. If you run your post through a speech-to-text reader and the speech-to-text reader is having an issue reading it, that means your post has issues that need to be addressed. That means people with disabilities will not understand what it is you're trying to say. And that means you're leaving out people with disabilities out of very crucial and very important information, especially if you're talking about very serious issues. Not to mention, reading the word killed spelled K1LL3D is incredibly difficult, even for someone without a disability. People on TikTok have had to adapt the way that they read things in order to understand whatever it is that these TikTok creators are trying to say. And that to me is utterly ridiculous. Again, like I said, I understand the need to censor yourself because otherwise the platform in which you're posting this content on will censor you. So you will be censored no matter what. But again, it's gotten to the point where some of these people are just adding fuel to the fire and adding problems where there should be no problem and being overly cautious. And keeping on the topic with Palestine, a lot of creators, especially after October 7th, and especially after the Israeli regime really started multiplying their attempts at a genocide and their genocidal attacks on Palestinian people, a lot of people were sharing really useful information, but that useful information, once again, was not getting through to people who needed that information. And I find often with social media, people with disabilities are the ones that are kind of left behind. Not only left behind, but forgotten about. No one has mentioned how difficult it is for people with even dyslexia to read what it is you're trying to say. People who can see but can't hear have to rely on captions, but oftentimes the captions aren't well edited, and if they are edited, they're edited to censor themselves. And that's when K1LL3D becomes a problem, because if your viewers are only relying on your captions to read them, but they can't read your captions because you're using emojis in place of words, then the message, the very, very important message that you're trying to get across, very valid, very important message that you're trying to get across, is not going to get across to certain communities. And we can't have that. We can't leave behind communities when important information is being shared. So I highly encourage for you guys to use the words as they were intended, spell them out the way that they were intended, and keep people with disabilities in mind when you're doing such things. If you feel the need to truly censor yourself, if you really, really cannot get your message across and you need to censor yourself, find a different way to do it. Don't over-exaggerate the way that you're censoring yourself, because oftentimes we are our own worst enemy, and we will censor ourselves more than these social media platforms will censor us. So keep that in mind next time you want to post another TikTok about whatever, whether that be an embarrassing story time or whether that be an actual legitimate trying to spread awareness issue. Please keep that in mind, and please change the way that you're speaking. Hey guys, I'm jumping in really quickly here just to update you guys on a situation that kind of is unfolding as I'm recording this segment. Thankfully, I still haven't uploaded the video or the podcast episode, but if you guys are watching, I'm so sorry for my change in appearance. This is still kind of developing news, but it's very fitting to the podcast topic, so I wanted to include it as well. For those of you listening, obviously this won't affect you, like my appearance will not affect you because you're listening, you're not watching, but the situation that is unfolding right now is that of a former member of One Direction, Liam Payne, who was found dead after he fell or jumped off of a third floor balcony. And obviously, I was part of the One Direction fandom. I still kind of am in a way. And so I've been getting TikToks about this ever since the news broke. And I've seen a lot of people refer to talk about his death as Liam Payne was found unalived in the hotel where he was staying at, or outside of the hotel that he was staying at, right? The point is, they're using the word unalived. And with that has come a lot of kind of jokes about his death, such as some comments have been saying, oh, so there definitely will not be a One Direction reunion. And part of the reason why I feel like Liam specifically is getting a lot of kind of jokes behind his death is in part because of the censorship that we're talking about, which I will touch on a little bit later, but also because just a few weeks ago, his ex came out with a book and said that Liam was very abusive towards her, and then more fans started coming out and talking about their experience and how Liam took advantage of them, and obviously that's very awful. And so I think that's one major part as to why people are making these kinds of jokes. But I think another major part is exactly like CK said, which is that whenever people use these kind of joke censorships, these censorships that sound like jokes, such as the word unalived, obviously the word unalived just means not alive. And it has since morphed, and now you can use a past tense version of it, which basically just means like the act of not aliving people, which sounds so ridiculous to say, but the act of killing someone, whether that be yourself or someone else. But yeah, it's like TK said, using these kinds of censorships that sound like jokes only lead to people treating situations like jokes. Now, I am not here to comment on the allegations of abuse of Liam Payne. I'm just here to obviously talk about this podcast episode topic. And so I think the allegations are kind of irrelevant to the topic that I'm discussing. But obviously, like I said, the allegations certainly have a role to play, because a lot of people a few weeks before his death were saying, I want a One Direction reunion, but with Zayn, Niall, Louis, and Harry. Or, oh, I believe in OT for One Direction, Zayn, Niall, Louis, Harry, right? And they would exclude Liam from these kinds of conversations. And so I think that's kind of what inspired these kind of jokey comments. And to me, that's very sad. It's very horrible, because Liam still has family. At the moment that we are right now, we don't know if his family had been notified by authorities before the information was leaked or not. Like, we don't know if they found out through the internet and through all these TikToks of people, filming themselves reacting to the news or whatever. But the point is exactly what CK was saying in their interview, which is that using these kinds of jokey words to talk about something very serious just diminishes the severity of the topic that you're talking about. If you are talking about suicide awareness and you say people who unalive themselves, that doesn't necessarily add anything to the conversation. It just makes it sound like you're joking about people who kill themselves, people who are struggling with suicidal ideations, exactly like CK said. So it definitely has been crazy for me to watch this kind of censorship affecting the way people talk about serious situations in real time, right as I'm planning to release this podcast episode. It definitely has been interesting, but I also wanted to mention something else, which is a lot of the people that are fighting for their First Amendment right to free speech are fighting for their First Amendment right to free speech because they want to be racist. We have seen time and time again a lot of these people who complain about their freedom of speech being violated, talking about how, oh, you can't say anything anymore, people are so snowflakes, people this and that, when in reality what they're fighting for is their right to be racist. But they already have that right to be racist. They just don't understand that people also have a right to talk back to them. But I think their main focus, these proponents of freedom of speech, their main focus should be targeting the corporations that are massively limiting people's speech to the point where you can be racist on platforms, but you can't talk about serious topics. That to me is a little bit crazy. It's crazy how on TikTok and on Twitter, you can find racist content so easily, but a lot of the content of serious situations the creators have to censor themselves to the degree that they are to get the information out, because they fear that the corporations that they are posting this content onto will come onto them and take their videos down. And obviously that leads to people censoring the word Palestinian to Pali Wali, which I still cannot get over. I understand, this is something that I need to clarify. I understand why it's being done. I just don't like the execution of it. I think you should still just refer to Palestinians as Palestinians. Like CK said, I actually don't know if they said this in the interview, but I was talking to them about it further and they said it sounds like a slur, referring to Palestinians as Pali Wali. And like I said, you're only perpetuating Israel's crime of genocide by calling them Pali Wali. I think there's a better word for that. And that's ultimately my question. Where do we draw the line? And I think the line should have been drawn a while ago. And I think these big proponents of freedom of speech should be doing more to fight against these advertising corporations that ultimately rule over the content that we can create. These big corporations ultimately have a say in what we can say online, and that censorship that has come from these big corporations policing what we say online has suddenly leaked into our day-to-day life. And I think that's what freedom of speech proponents should be fighting for. They should not be fighting for their right to be racist or their right to be homophobic. They already have a right to be racist and homophobic. I think that's the biggest issue that they should be tackling, and I think that's the biggest issue that we also should be tackling. And I think that's one area where I do agree with these freedom of speech proponents. Big corporations should not be in charge of policing what it is we say. It has gone from something worthwhile, i.e. censorship of racism and homophobia, to something that is completely extreme and completely benefits propaganda that certain governments are trying to spread. And I think that's where the line should be drawn. I do think that's where the line should be drawn. And it's not like these big corporations are policing racist speech. The only thing they're policing is people talking about racist speech. It's not like these big corporations are policing homophobic speech. They're only policing people talking about homophobic speech and the effects that homophobic and racist speech has, which is counterintuitive to what censorship online was initially created for. It was initially created to protect these communities that are being attacked, that are being told all these different things about their race, their sexuality, their gender, etc. But it has since, over the last 10 years, it has since flipped to protecting the people who are spouting this hate and policing the people who are trying to raise awareness for very important topics, which is just backwards to me. And it's incredible how the majority of the proponents of freedom of speech are arguing that they're no longer allowed to be bigots when they are. I would say right now is one of the peak moments in internet history to be a bigot. This is the era where bigots will be more protected than the people bigots are attacking. But I think they have a point when they talk about corporations and their sort of overpowering policing, that they're over policing of social media sites and the way that we talk to each other and the way that we talk about things. I think freedom of speech proponents have a point there, and I think that's the main issue. That's the issue that we should be tackling. Of course, with this, I have opened the doors for Elon Musk stans to come into my comments or my social media and say, well, thank goodness Elon Musk bought Twitter because Twitter no longer has censorship. And to that I say, Twitter absolutely still has censorship. It has just flipped. You're not noticing it because you're a bigot and you just wanted the right to be a bigot on whatever social media platform you were on. But if you criticize Elon Musk in any way, shape, or form, you're silenced. If you talk about anything that Elon Musk doesn't like, you're silent. That still is censorship. And if you're going to be fighting against censorship, you also have to fight against every form of censorship, even the censorship that you don't notice, if that makes sense. Obviously, illegal things definitely should be censored, but things where we're just having a conversation with one another, I think those should not be censored, and I think people should not be encouraged to censor themselves, even when they're talking face to face. I could go on a further rant about this, but I really need to finish editing this and uploading this video. So yeah, I'm going to switch it over to the outro. Anyway, let me know what you guys think about this issue, and please remember, don't censor yourself. I hope you enjoyed this podcast episode. This was a bit of a different format for me, so I hope you guys like it. And also let me know what you think about me uploading once every 2 weeks, at least until I get used to my schedule. And yeah, I will see you guys later. I will leave CK JENSEN'S social media linked down below if you liked what they had to say. And I will also leave my social media link down below, as I always do, in the show notes and also on the YouTube description. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching or listening, and I will see you guys in the next podcast episode, which will kind of be an expansion or a part 2 to this topic. Bye!